Tonight on Talking Points, controversy surrounding the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi continues.
A record amount of campaign donations are made ahead of the 2018 midterm.
And voter suppression is alleged in Georgia ahead of a gubernatorial election. This is Talking Points. And we start off with some breaking news tonight. Stormy Daniels' defamation lawsuit against President Trump is no longer valid. Good evening, I'm Shama.
And I'm Gilat. Melamed. A federal judge dismissed the case not more than 5 minutes ago. The dismissal means Daniels is now liable for the president's attorney fees.
And in other news, Saudi Arabia is facing heavy scrutiny following the disappearance of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Turkish officials are alleging they possessed recordings showing Khashoggi being murdered inside Turkey's Saudi consulate. This controversy is now creating new tensions in U.S.-Saudi relations, and here to discuss them is Talking Points analyst Brandon Ross. All right, Brandon, great to have you here. To start off, how is Trump dealing with this? I mean, we've seen him kind of brush off authoritarian dictators behaving badly in the past. What's different about this?
Well, this one's interesting. If you asked me this question at the beginning of the day, you'd be getting a completely different answer, because at the beginning of the day, it seemed like Saudi Arabia was getting ready to say, deny, 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 we don't know anything about this. Then it shifted to, we're going to probably try to shift blame away from the crown prince, and now it just seems like they're just going to sort of admit to it, but say it was kind of an accident. What they're allegedly reporting is that this was sort of an accidental death as a result of a harsh interrogation. And President Trump said last night in response to this report that will come out that he says he has seen, that it could result in some sanctions and some harsh scrutiny. It doesn't look like he's going to take a soft stance.
And now that the White House has heard Saudi Arabia's side and is getting more information from that end, what are the next steps to resolving this crisis?
Well, first the report's going to be released, and then immediately after that, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going to go to meet with the King of Saudi Arabia very soon. And once we see what happens in those conversations, we'll get a good gauge of what will follow. But it'll be interesting to see what the steps are beyond that.
So how important is it for the U.S. and Saudi Arabia to be on good terms? What does that mean for the global market? What does that mean for foreign relations?
Well, Saudi Arabia is a big trade partner and general partner with the United States. The thing with the United States is they obviously don't get along well with a lot of Middle Eastern countries. Aside from Israel, which is a democracy and very tight relations have always existed between those two sides. When it comes to the rest of the Middle East, the main way of channeling through them is through countries like Saudi Arabia, who are open with markets and interact with a lot of other foreign powers. You do see that a little bit with a country like Jordan, but they don't have as much sway as a country like Saudi Arabia does, which is with its big economic markets.
So you're discussing this importance of U.S.-Saudi Arabia relations, but now what are the steps, what are the actions to, mend these relationships and make sure the relationship is strong?
Well, like I said, Pompeo is going to meet with the Saudi king. After those discussions, it'll probably be discussed what the next steps will be, whether there are sanctions handed down or whether there's communication on either side to resolve this issue and to see what other possible consequences could exist down the road.
Well, B. Ross, important to look at this going forward. Thank you so much for being here. Great stuff.
Thank you for having me.
Attacks on press freedom and the safety of journalists across the globe are receiving mainstream attention following reports that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered outside the Saudi consulate. 2018 is already the deadliest year for journalists, with 56 feared dead around the world. Our Jack Watson is with the president of the Syracuse University chapter of Reporters Without Borders to discuss what the organization is doing to promote global press freedom.
And joining me now is the president of the Syracuse chapter of the Reporters Without Borders. It is Camila Grigera Naón. Now, Camila, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, in the mainstream in the United States right now, a lot of discussion happening about press freedom and about the safety of journalists. American politicians on Sunday morning talking to reporters about the case with Jamal Khashoggi, the fact that he is allegedly murdered now. How does this sort of tie into the larger trend of journalists being killed this year?
So basically, this year was recorded as the deadliest year by Reporters Without Borders, in the sense that internationally, so far, 56 journalists have died, and the year isn't even over. And this compares to 55 journalists the year before. So definitely there's a lot of international tension when it comes to journalists being persecuted and press freedom being repressed. And this was obviously highlighted in the past few years with the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was allegedly murdered in the Saudi consulate in Turkey, and as well the Bulgarian journalist Victoria Marinova, who was raped and then assassinated. So there definitely is a broader spectrum of persecution against journalists.
Reporters Without Borders, as I understand it, keeps a list of countries based on press freedom. And press freedom is becoming a larger point of discussion, especially here in the U.S. as well as in the Middle East. How do these countries that have been affected by this sort of violence against journalists, how do they measure up to the list that Reporters Without Borders keeps?
So Reporters Without Borders keeps a press freedom index ranked from 1 to 180. So basically it measures how free a country is in terms of their press and their media, 1 being the highest and 180 being the lowest. So Saudi Arabia is ranked 169th, so that is very low, 169th over 180. Whereas Bulgaria is ranked 111. So both of them are very, very low. And basically this just evaluates how freely journalists can express themselves and investigate it and obtain information without fear of being killed or harassed, et cetera, et cetera. And a common misconception in the United States is that we're relatively high, but really we're ranked 45th, which, considering that the United States is a superpower, is not that high. So even here in the US, we face not so drastically persecution, but we don't reach the high standards of press freedom here.
Right, and Camila, the last question that I want to leave us with here is, do you believe that this trend of violence against journalists is an outlier in this year, or can we expect sort of the tragic things that have happened to journalists to continue moving into the next year and moving into 2020?
Personally, I think they will continue. I don't think that this has been an outlier. I think that this has been an upward trend, as can be seen this year when compared to last year. Not only is this year the highest one, but Reporters Without Borders is working on 10 cases currently of journalists that have been incarcerated or assassinated. So with all of the tensions that are going on globally, I don't see this trend going down.
All right, Camila, certainly something to keep our eye on. Thank you so much. Back to you guys.
After the break, we'll take a look at campaign funding ahead of the 2018 midterms. Don't go away.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it. No.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it. No.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
As the midterm elections approach, campaigns are dumping money into their elections for a final pre-election push. Talking Points analyst Michael Furnari is here to discuss some of these national campaign finance trends. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. And we've seen some candidates posting historic fundraising numbers this election cycle. Can you give us a big picture of what the fundraising has been like so far?
Absolutely. It's been an absolutely astronomical year so far for spending in this election cycle. Now, so far we've already spent $1 billion between all these different campaigns, and that's looks like it's going to be on its way to setting a record. Campaigns have already spent about $300 million nationwide on TV ads, which is almost unheard of. These are the kind of numbers you see in a presidential year. And the reason, if you had to ask what the reason is for all this increased spending, I think you can put a lot of it at the kind of the feet of President Trump, and a lot of it at the feet of a lot of the polarization going on right now. Now, we always talk about, when it comes to political spending, we love to talk about the PACs, we love to talk about all these different kind of like the swampy kind of fundraising. But in reality, what has been contributing a lot more this year is individual donations from a lot of these big party donors. Michael Bloomberg, for example, is going to be donating about $80 million to this election cycle. And those are the kind of numbers that it may not make as many headlines because you're not looking at the NRA or some kind of super PAC for those donations. And I think some of the intensity, the enthusiasm, the polarization, I think that's giving people the sense that they really need to kind of pitch in themselves and really make it a team effort to try to get these candidates over the hump.
So there's a tremendous amount of money being poured into it, but where is this money going? What are the big races? Where are Republicans and Democrats putting all of that money?
The two ones that are the most obvious ones to look at, so you've got the Texas Senate race with O'Rourke and Cruz. Now, Beto O'Rourke made a lot of headlines this week when the campaign finance came out for quarter three. O'Rourke raised about $38 million this quarter, which puts him to about $61 million for this campaign. And if you want to, harken back to 2016, that's more money than Jeb Bush had for his entire presidential campaign. It's more than Marco Rubio had for his campaign. They both had about $50 million. And those are the kind of numbers that I think maybe you might be a little wary of if you're a Democratic strategist, because O'Rourke is down pretty substantially in the polls that we've been seeing recently. And he's he's a young figure. He's somebody people like a lot, but there's people like Claire McCaskill or Dean Heller's challenger who probably need that money a little bit more than Beto O'Rourke does, and it's maybe a smarter investment. So I think that maybe we're hearkening back to 2016 in the sense that Democrats maybe are looking to the wrong states to try to flip the Senate. And the other race to mention is the Florida Senate race with Bill Nelson and Rick Scott, who are combining for about $50 million between the two of them, which is astronomical, and they're just dumping money into TV right now in Florida.
Now, you have these astronomical numbers in these big races, but how important actually is this money? Does this raising money correlate to success, or is it kind of just almost a horse race to say, look how much more money I raised than my opponent?
That's a good question. And of course, nobody's turning down the money.
Of course.
But I think if you were to look at kind of some of the trends in the Senate, if you look at the seat that John Ossoff lost in the special elections, if you look at Hillary Clinton losing to Donald Trump, and the way Beto O'Rourke is looking right now against Ted Cruz, I think money is maybe a little bit overrated. It's obviously important, and I think in the statewide races, the thing that people miss is that what is maybe the most important thing you spend money on is the ground game and on strategy and volunteers and setting up offices around the state, as opposed to TV, which is the big flashy thing that everybody makes money off of. But the results of TV translating to votes have not been great in the last few years. There are a lot of candidates who've put a lot of money into that strategy, and it hasn't really gotten them too far. So I think it's probably overrated, but of course, it's an advantage that nobody's going to turn down.
So we've been talking about kind of the big slugfest in national politics, but let's take it local. Dana Balter versus John Katko. What's the money looking like in that race? Has someone fundraised more? We've seen a lot of TV ads. Can you just shed a little bit of light on that?
Absolutely. Now, at the beginning of the cycle, Dana Balter was not looking like she would be able to stick around too long. I mean, if you remember at the beginning of the campaign, her office was operating out of her house for the campaign at a certain point. And of course, Katko's an incumbent, so he's got a lot of money flowing in from the party and from some of those special interest groups. So Katko definitely has more money. He's got more of an infrastructure. Now, some people see Dana Balter as kind of like an insurgency type candidate, but I think it remains to be seen whether or not she's going to really be able to engineer that turnout. And she's got a little bit less money right now, so she's going to really need to tap into some of those hardcore progressive voters. And if they come out, which is something that remains to be seen in Syracuse, whether or not that's effective. And but certainly in terms of the traditional metrics, Katko certainly has an edge.
Well, in just 3 weeks, we'll see if the money pays off. Michael, thanks so much. Recent polling in the House and Senate suggests that 2018 could be an unusual year, with the two chambers diverging in outcomes. Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing appears to be a key potential turning point. Joining us to discuss the reality of the potential blue wave is Talking Points correspondent Anthony Dabbundo. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us. And what shifts have we seen in the polling recently? We've seen Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. That's been leading, to some shifts in the polls. But what else have we seen?
Absolutely. Over the last month, we've seen that the House polls have remained relatively similar. Democrats are favored, according to 538's election forecast, to be the favorite and about 80% to win the House. We've seen, though, in the Senate, however, that the numbers have changed significantly. Republicans had their chances as low as 65%. Now they're back up to 80%. And the reason for that is because we've seen multiple Senate races in Republican states that have become more and more Republican. For example, as Michael was just talking about, Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, there were polls showing a month ago that they were, neck and neck. Beto was down a couple points. Now, a new poll from the New York Times has Beto down 8 points, down 10 points, down even 12 points. If you look at North Dakota, Kevin Cramer, he was projected to lose originally. More and more polls are showing him up by almost as much as double digits over Democratic incumbent Heidi Heitkamp. And then if you look across at other races like Tennessee, former Governor Phil Bredesen was also favored early in the polls, but as Marsha Blackburn has continued to consolidate her base, she has taken the lead in the polls by up to double digits. So these seats that the Democrats needed to flip, they're just not there anymore. It doesn't mean it's not a blue wave.
All right, so I want to go deeper into those shifts because we talk about the differences in congressional House races and Senate House races. So it's retreating, but why is it retreating? What are the reasons that we're seeing some of these flips now? Not so sure.
Well, the majority of the congressional House districts that we've been covering closely on Talking Points and we've been looking into have been in very blue or very purple states. So for example, California, there's three seats held by Republicans in California. California 45 is the notable one with Mimi Walters. Katie Porter is now favored to win that race. It's a suburban district in Orange County. If you look at Pennsylvania 1 with Brian Fitzpatrick, Fitzpatrick is an incumbent Republican who's running in suburban Philadelphia. His polls are showing he might even be down in that race to Scott Wallace. So there's multiple races in New Jersey, New Jersey 7, in New York, even with this race, John Katko and Dana Balter, where it's appearing that the Democrats have a higher chance, but that just isn't translating into the deeper red Republican states that Trump won by 30, 40 points. I mean, other than Joe Manchin and John Tester in Montana and West Virginia, there's been multiple Republican states that are just too Republican for the Democrats' incumbents to win.
And speaking of those states that Trump won by 30, 40 points, I mean, there is a big difference between a midterm year and a presidential election year, but what are some of the comparisons we can make to the 2016 key races we saw?
Right, so a lot of people thought in 2016 that it was called the Trump effect. All of these rural areas had incredible turnout. They went very red, while the suburban districts turnout was so-so, and they trended to the Democrats. Now, the question was, with Trump not being on the ballot, how will that change in 2018? Now, Trump's not on the ballot, but the polls are suggesting that, especially with the Kavanaugh hearings, a lot of the strong conservatives have been very motivated recently. Now, that could be Kavanaugh, that could just be it's election season, tensions are heating. But the reality is that all those Republican voters seem riled up. They seem ready to come to the polls in the rural areas, and the suburbanites aren't happy with President Trump. He's very unfavorable there. So you have those Democrats pushing back, and that's why there's House seats in play in the congressional districts in the suburbs.
Really interesting stuff. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Thanks.
Coming up, voter registration in Georgia comes to a standstill just weeks before an election.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
Civil rights activists are now suing Georgia Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp for alleged discriminatory voting laws. This follows an Associated Press report that thousands of voter applications are on hold in the state with just a little over 3 weeks before the midterm elections. Talking Points analyst Conor Wight is here to break down the case of potential voter suppression in the Peach State.
Brian Kemp serves as the Secretary of State of Georgia, meaning that part of his duties are to carry out voter registration laws. It's for that reason that his opponent, Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams, is calling for his resignation. Here's Abrams on CNN's State of the Union.
It should not be a question of trust on the part of voters, whether they can trust the system. And right now he is eroding the public trust in the system because 53,000 people have been told, you may be able to vote, you may not. It's up to you to prove it.
The problem stems from the so-called exact match voter registration process. In Georgia, voters must register with the exact information that the state has on file for each citizen, either in the Department of Driver Services or with the Social Security Administration. This means that something as little as a missed hyphen, wrong letter, or any other kind of typo could place your registration on hold. According to the Associated Press, over 53,000 registrations are currently on hold for not meeting these requirements. This is where allegations of racial disparity come into play. In Georgia, approximately 32% of the population is black. Of those 53,000 registration holds, however, 70% are black voters. On Thursday, various civil rights groups filed a lawsuit with the U.S. District Court in Atlanta, claiming that the exact match process violated the Voting Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, and the 1993 Voter Registration Act. The Kemp campaign, however, doesn't see it this way. Kemp's office blames the New Georgia Project, a voter registration group founded by Stacey Abrams in 2013. Kemp alleges that they submitted sloppy voter registration forms that didn't match with state records. He said that this is something that fools the media every year. There is no suppression going on, and even boasted that this is a record-breaking year with 6.8 million voters registered for the upcoming elections. It's important to note that those with registrations currently on hold will still have the chance to vote. The law states that if Election Day happens within 26 months, as this one does, a provisional ballot can be cast at the polls.
All right, Connor. So let's talk about this case. What is the defendant claiming and what are the plaintiffs claiming in this case?
So the main point that the plaintiffs are claiming is that this is placing a unjust, unwarranted burden on minority voters to have all of this stuff in to be able to make their claim that they are going to be able to register to vote or even cast these provisional votes by Election Day. Now, conversely, what the Office of the Secretary of State, is saying is that these are just politically motivated claims, that there isn't really a legal basis for their complaint here.
Mm-hmm. Now, Peyton, voter suppression has been an issue in past elections. It can take various forms and, could be happening here in Georgia. Are there other places in the country where we're seeing examples of voter suppression?
Yes, there are other places. The two main places right now are Florida and North Dakota, who are having problems with voter suppression. In Florida, there's an issue with whether or not to have convicts, ex-felons be able to vote. And even in Louisiana, there's going to be a question on the ballot asking whether or not they would be able to hold any position in office. And then in North Dakota, the new law is saying that you need a permanent address with a street address, which is becoming an issue for a lot of Native Americans who live on reservations in North Dakota that have P.O. boxes but do not have street addresses. So technically they will not be able to vote because of this. And so it's kind of a mad rush. This decision just came out literally a week before, so they're going to have to find permanent addresses very quickly.
So you talked a little about the Florida ballot initiative. What are the chances that that gets overturned and these felons do get to vote?
I mean, there is a high chance that it will get overturned. Obviously, this is a huge issue that's been coming up in a lot of the states, and if Florida does overturn this, then it will kind of follow suit with the rest of the states and their ideas about this particular issue.
Right. What we're looking at in Florida is what's going to actually be on the ballot on November 6th is the amendment, an Amendment 4 to the Constitution, which will allow current felons that have not committed murder or sexual assault-based felonies to regain their voter rights after they've completed their sentences and probations and parole. And according to recent polls from recent media, there's a good chance that happens. About 70% of voters are saying that they will vote yes on Amendment 4, and in Florida, you only need a 60% approval for amendments to be made to the state constitution.
Now, I want to turn back to that North Dakota law saying you need a street address in order to vote. The Supreme Court took a look at that. What did they have to say?
So the Supreme Court really didn't want to intervene with it, but Ginsburg and Kagan had very strong dissenting opinions against that because Ginsburg wrote the opinion for the two of them, saying that it kind of wasn't a strange wording of the law where people that were able to vote in the primaries with a certain ID would not be able to use that same ID in the elections, which is kind of strange because it's like, what kind of ID can you use? And then going off of that, there's a large amount of people who will not be able to vote because of this specific law. So they obviously weren't in agreement with this at all.
And in many ways, this could actually pull out the rug from underneath a lot of voters because, as you mentioned, this only became law very recently, just less than a month before Election Day. And a lot of voters were able to use their P.O. boxes and other addresses other than what the current law now states for something as recently as the primary election. So a lot of people may actually be turning up to the polls without realizing that they're no longer eligible to vote.
Okay. Peyton, Connor, thanks so much. Coming up, we'll be looking ahead to some developing stories in the coming weeks. Stay tuned.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. You're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Yeah, I saw that coming. That will throw you off track. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why?
Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you eat stuff like this.
You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately.
That's why I'm ready to quit. I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me.
Okay, but remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham-bam minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high-five.
The EPA is eliminating a scientific panel on air pollution. The Particulate Matter Review Panel is made up of scientific experts who advise the EPA on how to limit levels of soot and smog in the air. The goal is to reduce the pollutants to a level low enough so that the air is safer for humans to breathe. This 20-person panel is not made of political appointees. They are scientific experts. The elimination of this panel is not the only action the EPA has taken in the past few days regarding air pollution. Back in July, the EPA was looking for scientists to be on a separate board that examines ground-level ozone, but plans for that are now scrapped too. Ground-level ozone is not emitted directly into the air, but it's what forms when certain chemicals react with sunlight. It's still very harmful to human health, and the Washington Post is reporting that experts who were looking to fill that board received an email from the EPA saying it will no longer be forming this advisory commission.
With one panel on air pollution not slated to continue and another pollution panel not slated to form, what does this mean for the EPA under the Trump administration going forward? The most immediate answer is less scientists advising the EPA. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching. Follow us on the web at talkingpoints.com. I'm Elijah Shama. Goodbye.
I'm Gilat Melamed.